I decided to surprise my wife at work. The security guard stopped me from entreing. When I said, "I'm here to see Mrs. Davis, the company's CEO. I'm her husband," he smiled. "Sir, the CEO's name is Mrs. Johnson and her husband is coming out right now." I decided to play along. "Look, I'm not saying I'm the greatest husband who ever walked this godforsaken earth, but I'm definitely in the top tier of guys who actually remember their wife's favorite pastries. That's got to count for something, right?" So there I was on what I thought would be an ordinary Tuesday morning, standing in the gleaming lobby of BrightPath Media with a box of ridiculously overpriced eclairs from that bougie French bakery downtown. The one where they pronounce everything with an accent so thick you'd think they just stepped off the plane from Paris, even though the owner's name is definitely Brad from New Jersey. But whatever, Rachel loved their chocolate eclairs, and I loved Rachel. So $23.50 later, I was walking into her workplace feeling like I'd just won the world's most thoughtful spouse award that absolutely nobody was handing out except the jury in my own head. My plan was bulletproof, or so I thought. Walk in, flash my most charming smile at the receptionist, take the elevator up to the executive floor, surprise Rachel in her corner office with the fancy view she'd worked her ass off to earn, hand her the eclairs, steal a kiss that would make the rom-com gods weep with envy, and then maybe, just maybe, humble brag about it later to my buddies during our weekly poker night. You know, casual stuff like, "Oh yeah, I just dropped by my wife's Fortune 500 company to bring her pastries because I'm that kind of supportive spouse." I had it all mapped out in my head, complete with the imaginary slow-motion sequence where she'd look up from her laptop, see me standing there with baked goods, and her face would light up like I'd just presented her with the damn Hope Diamond instead of sugar-crusted choux pastry. Instead, I got about 15 feet into the marble-floored lobby before I was intercepted by what I can only describe as Sergeant Security, a man who looked like he'd been specifically engineered in a laboratory to intimidate people who didn't belong. This guy was built like a commercial-grade vending machine. You know, the kind that dispenses protein shakes and intimidation in equal measure. His shoulders were so broad they could have had their own zip code, and his security badge was pinned to a chest that probably required its own insurance policy. The name tag said Derek, but in my head, I immediately nicknamed him The Wall because that's essentially what I'd just run into. "Authorized personnel only," he barked, and I swear to God, his voice had the kind of bass that could probably shatter windows in a 3-block radius. He wasn't asking. He was informing me of a universal truth, like gravity or the fact that gas station sushi is always a mistake. Now, I'm not an unreasonable guy. I get it. Security protocols, corporate policies, all that fun stuff that keeps the riffraff out and the executives safe from weirdos with questionable intentions. But I wasn't some random dude trying to sell magazine subscriptions or hand out religious pamphlets. I was Rachel's husband, her partner, the guy who'd been there through her MBA program, through the late nights when she was climbing the corporate ladder, through the stress-crying sessions, and the celebration champagne moments. So I straightened up, adjusted my grip on the eclair box, and said with what I thought was pretty reasonable confidence, "I'm Rachel Davis's husband. I'm just here to drop off some pastries." The look he gave me could have curdled milk. It was this perfect combination of pity and secondhand embarrassment, like I'd just told him I believed in the Tooth Fairy and also thought professional wrestling was real. He actually smirked. This guy had the audacity to smirk at me and said, "Sir, the CEO's name is Mrs. Johnson, and her husband is right there." Time did this weird thing where it simultaneously sped up and slowed down, like when you're in a car accident and your whole life flashes before your eyes, except instead of my life, it was just my morning confidence crumbling into microscopic pieces. I turned in the direction of his meaty finger, and that's when I saw him. Tall, like annoyingly, unfairly tall, the kind of height that makes you wonder if he had to duck through doorways in his own house. Hair perfectly styled in that. I woke up like this, but actually spent 45 minutes and 3 products achieving this look kind of way. Wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, maybe even my quarterly rent if we're being honest. The kind of suit that whispered, "I have a personal tailor and also generational wealth," without saying a damn word. And there, walking right beside him, laughing at something he'd just said, touching his arm in that casual, familiar way that made my stomach drop like I'd just crested the peak of a roller coaster, was Rachel. My Rachel. Except apparently, she wasn't just my Rachel anymore. Or maybe she'd never been only my Rachel. Or maybe I'd suddenly fallen into an alternate dimension where everything I knew was wrong and nothing made sense, and also, I was clearly having a stroke because this couldn't be real. The security guard, Derek, the wall, destroyer of dreams, actually beamed at this guy. Full-on smiled like they were buddies, like this dude probably brought him coffee sometimes or remembered his birthday. See? That's Mr. Johnson. Nice guy. Always carries her bag. And sure enough, Mr. Tall Dark and What the Hell is Happening had Rachel's designer briefcase slung over his shoulder like it weighed nothing. Like carrying the CEO's personal belongings was just part of his daily routine. Like this was totally normal, and I was the crazy one for standing there with my discount pastries, wondering if reality had just glitched. I wanted to say something clever, something that would explain that I also carry things for Rachel, like her emotional baggage, her stress about quarterly earnings, her anxiety about whether her mother would make passive-aggressive comments at Thanksgiving dinner. But Derek didn't seem like the kind of guy who appreciated nuance or metaphor. He seemed like the kind of guy who dealt in concrete facts, and the concrete fact was that some other dude was walking around this building being referred to as Mr. Johnson, married to Mrs. Johnson, who apparently used to be Rachel Davis, who was definitely, absolutely, 100% supposed to be married to me, Liam Davis, the guy currently having an existential crisis in a corporate lobby. They disappeared into the elevator together, still talking, still laughing, and I just stood there like an absolute moron, clutching a box of eclairs that were probably melting in my sweaty hands because apparently my body had decided that now was the perfect time to activate every single sweat gland I possessed. The elevator doors closed with a soft ding that sounded weirdly final, like the universe was punctuating the end of my marriage with pleasant elevator music. Somewhere deep inside my brain, buried under the layers of panic and confusion and the beginning stages of what I was pretty sure was a mental breakdown, a small, rational voice tried to whisper that there had to be an explanation. Maybe it was a work thing. Maybe Johnson was her professional name. Maybe this was all some elaborate prank for a YouTube channel I didn't know about. But that rational voice was immediately drowned out by the much louder, much more dramatic voice that was currently screaming that Rachel had clearly upgraded me like I was an outdated iPhone model. She'd gone out and found herself a better version. Liam 2.0, now with improved height, superior fashion sense, and apparently, a last name that matched hers on the corporate directory. The worst part? The eclairs were definitely melting now, chocolate probably seeping through the fancy cardboard box, which felt like a pretty accurate metaphor for how my entire life was currently dissolving into a puddle of confusion and humiliation. I looked down at them, then back up at the elevator that had swallowed my wife and her apparent other husband, then over at Derek, who had already moved on to scrutinizing someone else's credentials because my personal crisis wasn't nearly interesting enough to hold his attention. And that's when I realized that this ordinary Tuesday morning had just become the beginning of either the biggest misunderstanding of my life or the most devastating revelation I'd ever faced. Either way, I was pretty sure I was going to need a lot more than overpriced eclairs to fix whatever fresh hell I'd just stumbled into. For a solid 10 seconds, maybe 15, maybe an hour, honestly, time had completely lost all meaning. My brain just straight up stopped working. Like when your laptop freezes and you can see the cursor, but nothing's happening and you're just sitting there clicking frantically, hoping it'll snap back to life. Except my cursor was my entire consciousness, and the spinning wheel of death was just looping endlessly in my head. I've heard people talk about fight or flight, but nobody ever mentions the third option, which is apparently stand perfectly still in a corporate lobby holding pastries while your entire understanding of reality crumbles around you like a stale cookie. Rachel, my wife of 5 years. 5 years of shared Netflix passwords, joint tax returns, arguments about whose turn it was to take out the trash, inside jokes that nobody else found funny, that embarrassing matching couple's Halloween costume from 2 years ago that we both swore we'd never speak of again, was walking beside a guy who looked like he'd been photoshopped into real life. I'm talking catalog model handsome, the kind of attractive that almost feels aggressive, like his face was specifically designed to make other men feel inadequate. He probably had a skincare routine. He definitely had a skincare routine. You don't achieve that level of jaw definition without some serious moisturizing commitment, and possibly the kind of genetics that the rest of us regular humans can only dream about during our most optimistic moments. Derek the security mountain was still standing there, and I swear he looked almost proud, like he was personally responsible for the existence of Mr. Perfect. See? That's Mr. Johnson. Nice guy. Always carries her bag. The way he said it, with this tone of genuine admiration, made me want to scream into the void. Oh, he carries her bag? Well, fantastic. I carry her emotional trauma from that time her college roommate betrayed her trust. And also I once carried her home from her work Christmas party when she had won too many glasses of Prosecco and decided to tell everyone's fortune using hotel lobby furniture as props. But sure, let's give Mr. GQ over there a medal for basic briefcase transportation. I wanted to explain this to Derek, wanted to lay out my entire resume of husband activities, wanted to present a PowerPoint presentation titled, Why I'm Actually the Legitimate Spouse Here, a comprehensive analysis. But Derek didn't seem like the kind of guy who appreciated complex emotional narratives. He seemed like the kind of guy who dealt in simple truths like, that's the CEO's husband, and you're not authorized to be here, and probably, I bench press small cars for fun. As Rachel and her supposed husband disappeared into that elevator, the elevator I'd imagined taking with her, where we'd steal a moment alone before she dove back into her busy executive schedule, I stood there watching the floor numbers light up one by one. First floor, second floor, third floor. Each ding felt like another nail in the coffin of my sanity. They were probably talking about their day, maybe making plans for lunch, perhaps discussing some important business strategy that I couldn't possibly understand because I wasn't part of their world, their perfect, confusing, other husband world. The eclairs in my hands had gone from thoughtful romantic gesture to evidence of my complete failure to understand my own life in record time. The chocolate was definitely melting now. I could feel the box getting warm and slightly soggy, which somehow made everything worse. Even the pastries were giving up on me. The French bakery guy with the fake accent had probably cursed these eclairs specifically, whispered some Parisian hex that ensured they'd be present for maximum humiliation. These will be parfait for when your wife's secret other husband appears, han. Somewhere deep inside, buried under approximately 17 layers of panic, confusion, and the beginning stages of what my therapist would probably call catastrophic thinking, a rational voice tried to make itself heard. It was saying reasonable things like, there's obviously an explanation for this, and maybe it's a work situation, and perhaps you should calmly ask Rachel about this instead of jumping to conclusions. That voice sounded suspiciously like my mother, who was always annoyingly level-headed during crises and had once told me during a college breakup that I had a flair for the dramatic that could power a small theater production. Unfortunately, that rational voice was immediately overshadowed by the much louder, much more convincing voice that was currently broadcasting at maximum volume inside my skull. This voice was saying things like, she replaced you with a firmware update, and you're the outdated model, and did you really think cargo shorts and dad jokes were going to cut it forever? This voice sounded like every insecurity I'd ever had, now validated and given physical form in the shape of a 6-foot-something Adonis who probably had a gym membership he actually used instead of just paying for it monthly while promising himself he'd start going next week. I looked down at myself, my off-the-rack khakis that I'd bought on sale at Target, my button-up shirt that was wrinkled because I'd forgotten to move it from the washer to the dryer last night and had to give it the emergency, fluff it in the dryer for 10 minutes, and hope for the best treatment this morning. My shoes that were comfortable, but definitely not fashionable. Then I mentally compared this to Mr. Johnson's ensemble, which probably cost more than my car and had definitely never seen the inside of a Target or emergency dryer fluff cycle. The lobby around me continued its normal Tuesday morning rhythm. People swiping badges, walking purposefully toward elevators, carrying coffee cups, and looking important. Nobody else seemed to notice that my entire existence had just been called into question. The receptionist was answering phones. A delivery guy was dropping off packages. Somewhere, a printer was probably jamming, and Susan from accounting was probably complaining about it in a group chat. Life was just continuing like normal, completely indifferent to the fact that I'd just discovered my wife might have a whole separate husband situation going on. I thought about our morning. Rachel had kissed me goodbye, same as always. She'd stolen a sip of my coffee, same as always. She'd complained about a meeting she wasn't looking forward to, same as always. She'd been wearing her wedding ring. Our wedding ring. The one I'd saved up for 3 months to buy. The one she'd cried over when I proposed in that definitely not fancy restaurant where the waiter had accidentally spilled water on us during what was supposed to be the most romantic moment of my life. Had she taken it off in the car? Did she have 2 rings? Was I living in some kind of weird polygamy situation except nobody had bothered to inform me about it? The more I stood there, the more questions piled up in my brain like a particularly aggressive game of Tetris where all the pieces were shaped like anxiety and none of them fit together properly. How long had this been going on? Was this why she'd been coming home late so many nights, claiming it was just work? Was Mr. Perfect the reason she'd suddenly become interested in that expensive gym downtown? Did they have inside jokes? Did he know about her weird obsession with true crime podcasts? Did he know that she sang off-key in the shower, and that she couldn't cook rice without burning it, and that she had an irrational fear of birds that she refused to admit was irrational? Derek was staring at me now, probably wondering if he needed to escort me out or possibly call for backup, because the guy with the melting eclairs was clearly having some kind of episode in the middle of the lobby. I could see him subtly shifting his weight, preparing to intervene if I decided to do something crazy like actually try to follow my wife up to her office or demand answers, or just collapse into a puddle of confusion right there on the imported marble floor. But I didn't do any of those things. Instead, I did what any rational person would do when their entire reality had just been called into question. I turned around and walked out of that building with as much dignity as a man carrying melting pastries and a shattered ego could possibly muster, which is to say, not very much dignity at all. The moment I stepped out of Bright Path Media, the sunlight hit me like a personal attack. It was one of those aggressively cheerful days where the weather seemed completely oblivious to the fact that people's lives were falling apart. Birds chirping like they were auditioning for a Disney movie, the sky so blue it looked fake, a slight breeze that under normal circumstances I would have called pleasant, but now just felt like nature mocking me. I stood on the sidewalk for a minute, still clutching my box of traitorous eclairs, trying to decide what to do next. Going home felt wrong. Going back inside felt impossible. Standing here like a department store mannequin who'd gained sentience and immediately regretted it wasn't really a long-term solution either. That's when I spotted it across the street. Ground Control, one of those aggressively hipster coffee shops that had probably opened last month and would either become a neighborhood institution or close within 6 months, no in between. The kind of place with exposed brick walls, furniture that looked like it had been salvaged from your grandmother's attic and then distressed for authenticity, and a chalkboard menu written in handwriting so artistic you needed a decoder ring to figure out what was actually for sale. Perfect. If I was going to have a complete mental breakdown, I might as well have it somewhere with good espresso and the kind of atmospheric indie music that made you feel like you were the protagonist in your own sad independent film. I jaywalked across the street with the kind of reckless abandon that only comes from realizing traffic laws seem pretty insignificant when your wife might be committing bigamy, and pushed open the door to Ground Control. A little bell chimed, because of course it did. This place was committed to every single coffee shop cliché, and I was immediately hit with the smell of freshly ground coffee beans, and what I'm pretty sure was either patchouli incense or the natural musk of people who'd replaced deodorant with positive energy. The place was decorated in early hipster eclectic. Mismatched chairs, vintage posters for bands I'd never heard of, a bookshelf full of worn paperbacks that I suspected nobody ever actually read, but everyone definitely photographed for their Instagram stories. Behind the counter stood a guy who looked like he'd been assembled from a Pinterest board titled Urban Lumberjack Meets Philosophy Major. Man bun secured with what appeared to be a pencil or possibly a chopstick. I couldn't tell, and honestly didn't care enough to investigate further. Beard that had definitely been trimmed and shaped with more care than I'd ever given any aspect of my physical appearance. Wearing a flannel shirt in weather that absolutely did not require flannel, and I could see at least 3 tattoos peeking out from under his rolled-up sleeves, all of them probably deeply meaningful symbols that he'd explained to dozens of Tinder dates. "Welcome to Ground Control," he said in that particular tone that baristas in places like this always used, somehow both friendly and slightly judgmental, like they were happy to serve you, but also quietly evaluating your entire life based on your coffee order. "What can I craft for you today?" Craft. He said craft. Like coffee was an artisanal experience and not just a desperate attempt to inject caffeine directly into my bloodstream, so I could continue functioning as a semi-coherent human being. I'll take the darkest roast you have, I said, and I could hear the exhaustion in my own voice. I sounded like I'd been awake for 72 hours straight, which wasn't true, but emotionally I'd definitely lived through at least 3 lifetimes in the past 20 minutes. Man Bun squinted at me with this expression of deep concern that seemed wildly disproportionate to a simple coffee order. How dark are we talking? Like, I had a rough morning dark, or I'm questioning the fundamental nature of existence dark. Midlife crisis dark, I replied, which wasn't even inaccurate. I was 33, which wasn't technically midlife unless I was planning to die at 66, but emotionally, I'd just aged about 15 years in a corporate lobby, so I figured it counted. He nodded slowly, like I'd just shared something profound, and turned to his elaborate coffee setup that looked more complicated than the dashboard of a spaceship. While he did whatever mystical ritual was required to produce midlife crisis dark coffee, I grabbed a table by the window, the kind of small, wobbly table that required you to fold up a napkin and stick it under one leg to achieve anything resembling stability. I set down my box of now definitely ruined eclairs and positioned myself where I had a perfect view of Bright Path Media's entrance across the street. This was insane. I knew this was insane. I was literally staking out my wife's workplace like some kind of discount private investigator, except I didn't have a trench coat or a camera with a telephoto lens or any idea what I was doing. What was I expecting to see? Rachel and Mr. Perfect emerging holding hands? Maybe they'd have matching his and hers coffee mugs? Perhaps they'd stop to make out passionately in front of the building while a convenient photographer captured the moment for the Your Husband Sucks section of the local newspaper. Man Bun appeared at my table with a cup of coffee so dark it looked like it could achieve sentience and start making its own life decisions. Here you go, friend. This blend is called Existential Dread. It's a customer favorite among the emotionally compromised. I couldn't tell if he was serious or if this was some kind of elaborate bit, but honestly, at this point, a coffee called Existential Dread felt perfectly appropriate for my current situation. I took a sip. It tasted like someone had distilled pure bitterness and then added a hint of regret and possibly some notes of, why did I think surprising my wife at work was a good idea? It was perfect. For the next hour, I sat there, watching the entrance of Bright Path Media like it held the secrets to the universe. People came and went. Men in suits, women in power clothes, a delivery guy with approximately 17 packages, someone walking a dog that was definitely too fancy to be a regular working-class dog. But no Rachel. No Mr. Perfect. No answers to any of the 4 million questions currently staging a riot in my brain. The logical part of me knew I should probably just go home, wait for Rachel to get off work, and have an actual adult conversation about what I'd seen. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. Maybe Mr. Johnson was her business partner, and Derek the security guard was just confused about their relationship. Maybe I'd hallucinated the entire thing and was currently sitting in a hipster coffee shop having a breakdown over a situation I'd completely imagined. But the other part of me, the part that was currently running the show and making all the decisions, was convinced that sitting in this window and surveilling my wife's workplace was absolutely the most rational course of action. This part of me had apparently decided that I was now a detective, and this case needed solving, and the fact that I had 0 detective skills and was probably violating several stalking laws was completely irrelevant. I was halfway through my second cup of Existential Dread and seriously considering ordering something called a quarter-life crisis cappuccino when I saw them. Rachel and Mr. Perfect emerging from the building together, walking toward the parking garage. She was laughing at something he said. That genuine laugh she usually reserved for actually funny things, not the polite corporate laugh she used during business meetings. He was carrying her briefcase again, plus what looked like his own bag, and somehow making it look effortless instead of like a pack mule situation. They disappeared into the parking garage, and I made a decision that would have made my therapist schedule an emergency session. I pulled out my phone, opened the first rideshare app one could find, and requested a car. When the driver's profile appeared, Victor, 4.8 stars, drove a Toyota Camry that had seen better days. I started composing the message that would either lead to answers or get me permanently banned from all transportation services. I know this sounds crazy, but I need you to follow someone. Victor pulled up 3 minutes later. He was exactly what I expected from a 4.8-star rating, middle-aged, wearing a tracksuit that had definitely been stylish in another decade, with an expression that suggested he'd seen everything and was surprised by nothing. I jumped in the back seat just as a sleek black BMW pulled out of the parking garage. "That car," I said, pointing like I was in a movie, and this was a totally normal thing to say. "Follow that car." Victor looked at me in the rearview mirror, and I watched him make about 17 calculations in his head. Finally, he sighed the kind of sigh that contained multitudes, disappointment, resignation, a touch of amusement, maybe some regret about his career choices, and said, "Always because of woman." He wasn't wrong. He really wasn't wrong. Victor pulled into traffic with the kind of aggressive confidence that made me immediately regret every life choice that had led me to this moment, but also weirdly respect his commitment to the bit. The man drove like he'd been preparing for this exact scenario his entire life, weaving between cars with the precision of someone who'd either done this 1,000 times before or had absolutely no regard for traffic laws and was just winging it. I was genuinely 50-50 on which option was more likely, and honestly, given my current mental state, I wasn't sure I cared about the distinction. "You want I should stay close or keep distance?" Victor asked, his accent thick enough that I had to run his words through a mental translator before they made complete sense. He was watching the BMW, Rachel's BMW, a car I'd sat in literally hundreds of times, a car we'd test-driven together when she got her promotion, a car where we'd had countless conversations and arguments and moments, like it was the only vehicle on the road that mattered. "Close enough to see where they go, but not so close that they notice us," I said, which I realized immediately made me sound like I was auditioning for a role in a straight-to-streaming thriller that nobody asked for. "Is that possible?" Victor made a noise that might have been a laugh or might have been the sound of him questioning every decision that had brought him to the point of chauffeuring a desperate husband on a surveillance mission. "In my country, I drive taxi in war zone. This is nothing." I wasn't entirely sure if he was joking or if this was actual biographical information, and something told me it was probably better not to ask for clarification. We followed the BMW through downtown traffic, past the financial district where everyone looked stressed and over-caffeinated, through the arts district where everyone looked stressed but in a more deliberately disheveled way, and finally into the upscale restaurant row where everyone looked stressed but was hiding it behind expensive clothing and the kind of forced casual elegance that only comes from having money. The BMW pulled into the parking lot of the Vine Terrace, and I felt my stomach drop so fast it probably violated several laws of physics. The Vine Terrace, the most romantic restaurant in the entire city. The place with the year-long waiting list unless you were someone important or knew someone important or were willing to slip the maitre d' enough cash to reconsider your importance. The place I'd tried to get reservations for our anniversary last year and had been laughed off the phone, politely, but still definitely laughed at. The place with candlelight and violin players who wandered between tables and a wine list that was probably worth more than my car. Rachel had mentioned wanting to go there once, casually, the way you mention wanting to visit Paris or own a yacht, as a nice fantasy, not an actual achievable goal. And here she was, getting out of the car with Mr. Perfect, who was probably the exact kind of person who could get reservations at the Vine Terrace without even trying. He probably just called and said his name, and they immediately cleared a table and threw rose petals on it, or whatever the hell they did for people who existed in tax brackets I couldn't even conceptualize. Victor parked across the street in a spot that was either illegal or creatively legal. Again, I wasn't sure and didn't want to know. He turned off the engine and swiveled around to look at me with an expression that was equal parts sympathy and the kind of wisdom that comes from having seen too much of humanity's nonsense. "You want advice from old man who has seen many things?" he asked, reaching into his glove compartment and pulling out what appeared to be a slightly crushed blueberry muffin wrapped in a napkin. He handed it to me like he was presenting a sacred artifact. "You look like you need emotional carbs." I took the muffin because at this point, why not? My dignity was already scattered across 3 different locations throughout the city. A mysterious muffin from my rideshare driver's glove compartment was hardly going to make things worse. It was surprisingly good, actually, still warm, which raised questions about how long it had been in there and whether Victor had a side business I didn't know about. But I was beyond caring about food safety regulations. "She is your wife?" Victor asked, gesturing toward the restaurant where Rachel and Mr. Perfect had disappeared inside. "Yeah," I said around a mouthful of muffin that suddenly tasted like sadness and artificial blueberry flavoring. Or at least, I thought she was. Now I'm not so sure about anything. Victor nodded sagely, like I'd just confirmed something he'd suspected all along. "Is always the same story. Man loves woman. Woman loves man. Then maybe woman loves other man. Or maybe man is crazy and woman loves only first man, but man cannot see this because fear makes him stupid." He said this like it was a universal truth he'd learned through years of driving strangers around the city and collecting their emotional debris. We sat there for a minute in what I'm generously calling companionable silence, but was probably more accurately described as two men sitting in a car watching a restaurant like a couple of weirdos. Then Victor reached over and turned on his radio, which immediately started playing what I recognized as a deeply depressing 80s love ballad. Something about hearts breaking and love fading and probably rain, because all sad 80s songs were legally required to mention rain at some point. "You are going inside?" Victor asked, and there was no judgment in his voice, just genuine curiosity about how far down the rabbit hole of terrible decisions I was willing to go. "I'm going to look in the window," I said, which sounded only marginally less unhinged than, "I'm going inside to confront them." I pulled out my phone, making sure it was on silent, checking that the camera was working, transforming myself in real time into exactly the kind of person I would have judged harshly if I'd seen them in a crime documentary. I crossed the street with the purposeful stride of someone who definitely belonged in this upscale neighborhood and wasn't at all here to spy on his potentially bigamist wife. The Vine Terrace had these massive floor-to-ceiling windows that were probably meant to showcase the elegant dining experience to passersby and convince them to make a reservation, but right now were serving as the perfect surveillance opportunity for a man having a complete psychological break. I positioned myself behind a decorative planter that was home to some kind of ornamental shrub that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, and peered through the window. And there they were, at a table that was absolutely the best table in the restaurant, perfectly positioned near the window for the view, but with enough ambient lighting to create that soft, romantic glow that made everyone look like they were in a perfume commercial. Rachel was laughing again, that same genuine laugh, her head tilted back slightly in the way she did when something was actually funny and not just polite conversation amusing. She reached across the table and touched Mr. Perfect's arm. Not a brief, casual touch, but a lingering one, the kind of touch that suggested familiarity and comfort, and the sort of intimacy that made my chest feel like someone had reached in and squeezed my lungs directly. Then, because apparently the universe had decided I hadn't suffered enough today, she adjusted his tie, just reached over and straightened his collar, fixed his tie, the kind of casual grooming gesture that spoke of countless other times she'd done this, of a routine, of a relationship that had its own established patterns and behaviors. A waiter appeared with what looked like pasta, fancy pasta, the kind that probably had a name I couldn't pronounce and cost $40 for a portion that wouldn't fill up a reasonably hungry hamster. And then, I swear to God, I watched this happen in real time and my brain just started screaming. Rachel twirled some pasta on her fork and fed it to him. Actually fed him. Across the table. The fork went from her hand to his mouth like this was a totally normal thing they did. Like they were in a relationship montage from a romantic comedy. Except this wasn't a movie, and I wasn't the romantic lead. I was the obstacle that the audience was supposed to forget about by the third act. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and started recording through the window. Some distant, rational part of my brain was screaming that this was insane, that I was being a lunatic, that there were probably laws against this kind of behavior, that I was one step away from becoming a cautionary tale they'd discuss in therapy sessions and true crime podcasts. But the louder part, the part currently running the show, was convinced that I needed evidence, that I needed proof, that I needed to document this moment because otherwise, I'd convince myself later that I'd imagined it or exaggerated it or misunderstood what I was seeing. I filmed them laughing together, feeding each other pasta like they were in a goddamn Lady and the Tramp remake, sharing a bottle of wine that probably cost more than a car payment. existing in this perfect little bubble of romantic dinner ambience while I stood outside in the bushes having a mental breakdown and recording it all on my phone like the world's saddest documentary filmmaker. She fed him pasta? I whispered to myself, because apparently I needed to narrate my own trauma to make it feel real. She fed him pasta. I repeated it like a mantra, like if I said it enough times it would start making sense or stop hurting or transform into something I could actually process. Somewhere in America. Probably everywhere in America, honestly. Every therapist simultaneously sighed without knowing why, feeling a disturbance in the force that indicated someone, somewhere, was making choices that would require years of professional help to unpack. I stumbled back to Victor's car, my phone full of footage that I absolutely should delete, but knew I wouldn't. My heart doing that thing where it beats too fast and too hard like it's trying to escape my chest and run away to a place where wives don't have secret other husbands and romantic gestures don't backfire spectacularly. Victor took one look at my face and said, level 10 betrayal. She fed him pasta? I said, because apparently that was the detail my brain had latched onto as the most significant element of this entire disaster. Victor nodded gravely, starting the engine. Pasta is very intimate food. Is worse than kiss, maybe. We drove back toward my house in silence, except for the radio playing an endless stream of sad 80s love songs that felt personally targeted, and the sound of my blueberry muffin crumbling in my lap, like a perfect metaphor for my self-esteem, my marriage, and my ability to make rational decisions. I got home around 3 in the afternoon, which was objectively still early enough in the day to do something productive or reasonable or adult-like. But instead I went straight to my laptop with the kind of focused determination usually reserved for people working on actual important projects, not full-scale invasions of their wife's privacy. The house felt different somehow, quieter, emptier, like all the furniture knew what I'd witnessed and was judging me for it. Even our cat, Mr. Whiskers, a name Rachel had chosen despite my protest that it was the most generic cat name in existence, looked at me with what I interpreted as deep disappointment before sauntering off to nap somewhere that wasn't near me. I set up my workspace at the dining room table with my laptop, my phone with the incriminating restaurant footage, a bag of chips I'd grabbed from the pantry because apparently I was stress-eating now, and a determination to go full FBI on this situation. If Rachel was living some kind of double life, I was going to find out everything. Every detail, every connection, every piece of evidence that would either confirm my worst fears or reveal that I'd completely lost my mind and needed immediate psychiatric intervention. First stop. LinkedIn, the social media platform where everyone pretends their job is way more important and fulfilling than it actually is, and where people congratulate each other for things like, excited to announce I'm starting a new position, as if anyone actually cares. I searched Evan Johnson Brightpath Media and immediately found him, because of course people like him had perfectly optimized LinkedIn profiles that probably showed up first in every search algorithm known to humanity. And there he was, in a professional headshot that looked like it had been taken by a photographer who specialized in making already attractive people look even more attractive. Evan Johnson, Chief Operating Officer at Brightpath Media. Harvard MBA, because of course he had a Harvard MBA, because apparently this man had collected every possible advantage the universe could bestow on a human being. His summary was full of corporate buzzwords that made my eyes glaze over. Passionate about leveraging synergistic opportunities to drive transformative growth in the digital media landscape. What did that even mean? I'd read it 3 times and still couldn't tell you what this man actually did all day besides apparently steal other people's wives and look good doing it. I scrolled through his experience section, which read like a highlight reel of someone who'd never failed at anything in their entire life. Stanford undergrad, Goldman Sachs analyst, McKinsey consultant. Every company name was more impressive than the last, every position title more important sounding. The man had delivered stakeholder value and spearheaded strategic initiatives and optimized operational efficiencies his way through a career that made my own resume look like I'd been aggressively underachieving since birth. His skills section included things like strategic planning, business development, leadership, and, I'm not making this up, synergy. Someone had actually listed synergy as a skill, and 47 people had endorsed him for it. 47 people thought this man was good at synergy. I didn't even fully know what synergy meant in a business context, but apparently Evan Johnson had mastered it, and people were willing to publicly vouch for his synergy abilities. Then I moved to his posts, because nothing reveals a person's true character like their LinkedIn thought leadership content. Every post was some variation of corporate wisdom that sounded profound but meant absolutely nothing. In today's fast-paced business environment, synergy breeds innovation. Yeah, Evan. Well, synergy also apparently breeds the theft of other people's spouses, but you didn't include that in your inspirational post, did you? The key to success is empowering your team to think outside the box. Cool. Was Rachel part of your team? Was the box you were thinking outside of called traditional marriage? I read every single one of his posts, and each one made me irrationally angry. People in the comments were constantly praising him. Great insight, Evan. So true. Thanks for sharing. And I wanted to reply to every single comment with, this man is possibly a homewrecker and you're all enabling him with your engagement metrics. Next, I switched to Instagram. Because if LinkedIn is where people pretend to be professional, Instagram is where they pretend to have interesting lives. Evan's profile was public, another mark against him, honestly, because who keeps their Instagram public? Either people with nothing to hide or people with too much confidence, and I wasn't sure which was worse. His bio was infuriatingly simple. COO at BrightPath Media, Harvard 14 running, and coffee hot beverage man running, complete with emojis, because apparently in addition to his many other accomplishments, Evan Johnson also knew how to use pictographs to convey his personality. His feed was exactly what I expected. Perfectly composed shots of expensive coffee cups on marble countertops, photos from exotic vacation destinations with captions about finding balance and grateful for this moment, pictures from charity events where he was wearing a tuxedo and looking like he'd been born to wear formal wear, and here's where it got interesting. Multiple photos from BrightPath Media Company events. I found it about 15 photos down. A picture from something called the Leadership Summit Retreat from 6 months ago. The caption read, "Building Stronger Teams in Paradise Palm Tree, #leadership, #BrightPath, #teamwork." And there, in the photo, on a beach that looked like it had been pulled directly from a screensaver, were Evan and Rachel, standing together, smiling, wearing matching lanyards that said Leadership Summit 2025. The photo had been taken at sunset, naturally, because even their corporate retreat pictures had better lighting than my entire life. Rachel's hand was on Evan's shoulder. They both looked tan and happy, and like they were definitely not thinking about Rachel's actual husband back home, who was probably eating cereal for dinner and watching reruns of shows he'd already seen 5 times. Rachel had never mentioned a leadership retreat. 6 months ago, when this was apparently happening, she told me she had a quick overnight conference in the city and had come home the next day complaining about boring presentations and hotel room service. She hadn't mentioned beaches or sunsets or matching lanyards or Evan freaking Johnson with his stupid perfect smile and his stupid Harvard MBA. I screenshot the photo because apparently I was building a case file now, like I was going to present all this evidence to some kind of marriage tribunal and they'd rule in my favor. Your Honor, I submit Exhibit A, beach photo with suspicious body language and undisclosed tropical location. Twitter was next, though Evan's account was mostly just him retweeting business articles and occasionally posting the same corporate wisdom garbage he'd already shared on LinkedIn. Innovation doesn't happen in comfort zones. Well, Evan, neither does marriage fraud, but here we are. By the time I'd exhausted all the major social media platforms, it was past midnight, and I'd entered what I can only describe as an advanced stage of internet-induced paranoia. I'd looked at so many photos of Evan Johnson that his face was probably permanently burned into my retinas. I knew more about this man than I knew about some of my actual friends. I could probably write his biography at this point. Evan Johnson, a life of excellence, synergy, and possibly stealing someone's wife. A memoir. I opened a Notes app document and started typing, because apparently I needed to organize my conspiracy theories in a structured format. The title, The Evan Johnson Situation, an Analysis. Even in my darkest moment, I was still enough of a nerd to format my mental breakdown properly. Facts. Evan Johnson exists and is objectively successful and attractive. He works with Rachel as COO. Security guard identified him as Mr. Johnson, Rachel's husband. They went to romantic restaurant together. She fed him pasta. They went to beach retreat I didn't know about. He carries her bag regularly, according to Derek. They have synergy, professionally speaking, but also maybe literally. Theories. A. Rachel is having an affair with Evan. B. Rachel is somehow married to both of us. Bigamy. C. I'm in a coma, and this is all a stress-induced nightmare. D. I've completely misunderstood everything, and there's a reasonable explanation. E. I've lost my mind and need serious professional help. F. All of the above simultaneously. I stared at my list, the blue light from my laptop screen probably destroying my circadian rhythm and my retinas in equal measure. The chips bag was empty. I couldn't remember eating all the chips, but the evidence suggested I had. Mr. Whiskers had returned and was sitting on the table, staring at me with what I chose to interpret as concern, but was probably just him judging my late-night snack choices. At 3:47 a.m., fueled by chip-induced sodium overload and the kind of insomnia that comes from having your entire reality questioned, I did something I immediately knew was a mistake, but couldn't stop myself from doing anyway. I created a burner Instagram account. The username, definitely_Davis, because apparently even in my darkest moments, I thought I was hilarious. I didn't follow anyone. I didn't post anything. I just sat there with my new anonymous account, looking at Evan's beach photo with Rachel, zooming in on their smiling faces, trying to read body language like I was some kind of expert instead of just a guy having a breakdown at 4 a.m. The rational part of my brain, the part that sounded increasingly like it was screaming from very far away, possibly from a different dimension where I'd made better choices, was trying to tell me to just go to bed, to talk to Rachel in the morning, to handle this like an adult. But that voice was drowned out by the much louder voice that was convinced I was onto something, that I was solving a mystery, that all this late-night internet stalking was actually productive and not at all the behavior of someone who desperately needed intervention. I finally closed my laptop around 4:30, my eyes burning, my brain full of corporate synergy posts and beach photos and too many theories about my own life. Tomorrow, well, technically today, I'd figure out what to do next. Tonight, I'd just sit in the darkness of my dining room, surrounded by empty chip bags and conspiracy theories, wondering how a simple eclair delivery had turned into whatever this was. Spoiler alert, it was about to get so much worse before it got better. I woke up on the couch at around 10 a.m. with a crick in my neck that felt like someone had tried to fold me into an origami crane and given up halfway through. Chip crumbs embedded in my shirt, and Mr. Whiskers sitting on my chest staring at me like he was contemplating whether I'd wake up or if he should start planning how to eat me and make it look like an accident. My laptop was still open on the coffee table, displaying Evan Johnson's LinkedIn profile because apparently I'd fallen asleep mid-stalking session, which was definitely a new low even for me. My phone had about 14% battery left and approximately 47 browser tabs open, each one a different deep dive into the life and times of the man who may or may not have stolen my wife. Rachel had already left for work, obviously, because it was Tuesday, and she was the CEO of a major company and couldn't exactly call in sick with my husband is having a paranoid episode. There was a note on the kitchen counter in her handwriting. Didn't want to wake you. You looked exhausted. Love you. R, with a little heart drawn next to her initial, which would have been cute and touching under normal circumstances, but now just felt like evidence of something, though I wasn't sure what. Was this the note of a loving wife or the guilt-driven message of a woman living a double life? See, this is what happens when you spend all night on the internet convincing yourself you're married to a criminal mastermind. Suddenly, even heart doodles become suspicious. I made coffee that tasted like despair and regret, possibly because I forgot to actually put coffee grounds in the machine and just brewed hot water, but my brain was too fried to care about the distinction. I sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through my phone, refreshing BrightPath Media's website obsessively like something would suddenly change, like there'd be a press release that said, CEO Rachel Davis announces she's been living a lie, or COO Evan Johnson revealed to be homewrecker, company stocks plummet. That's when I saw it. A banner announcement on the BrightPath homepage, bright and cheerful and mocking me with its professional design. Join us for our annual career fair. Wednesday, November 5th, 10 a.m., 4 p.m. Open to the public. Discover your future at BrightPath Media. There was a stock photo of diverse, attractive people in business casual attire looking enthusiastic about employment opportunities, all of them definitely not having mental breakdowns or suspecting their spouses of bigamy. And just like that, an idea formed in my sleep-deprived, caffeine-deficient brain. An idea so spectacularly stupid that it immediately felt like the only logical course of action. I could go to this career fair. I could infiltrate BrightPath Media legitimately, as a potential job seeker, and gather intelligence from the inside. I could talk to people who worked with Rachel and Evan, casually ask questions, get a feel for their relationship dynamic, and maybe, just maybe, figure out what the hell was actually going on without resorting to more restaurant window surveillance that could potentially get me arrested. It was perfect. It was foolproof. It was absolutely going to blow up in my face. But at this point, what did I have to lose besides the remaining shreds of my dignity and possibly my marriage? I spent the next 24 hours preparing for my undercover mission like I was auditioning for a role in a spy movie written by someone who'd never actually seen a spy movie. I pressed my wedding suit, the same one I'd worn when I'd attempted the eclair delivery that had started this whole mess, because apparently I owned exactly one suit, and it was now cursed to only appear during the worst moments of my life. I printed out copies of my resume, which I hadn't updated in 3 years, and which now looked painfully inadequate compared to Evan Johnson's LinkedIn profile that I'd apparently memorized against my will. I practiced looking interested in career opportunities in the bathroom mirror, which mostly just made me look constipated and suspicious. Wednesday morning, I arrived at BrightPath Media at 10:15 a.m., fashionably late enough to avoid looking desperate, but early enough to have plenty of time to execute my completely reasonable and not at all unhinged plan. The lobby had been transformed into Career Fair Central, booths set up for different departments, recruiters with name tags and fake enthusiastic smiles, tables full of branded pins and stress balls and other corporate swag that people would take home and immediately lose in their junk drawers. Derek the security mountain was there, of course, because the universe loved irony. But this time, instead of stopping me, he just handed me a visitor badge and a tote bag with the BrightPath logo on it, which felt like a small victory until I remembered that this was all an elaborate ruse to spy on my own wife, and I probably needed therapy more than I needed a branded tote bag. I wandered through the booths, trying to look casual and job-seeking rather than desperate husband on a reconnaissance mission. The marketing department had a whole setup with a photo booth and a green screen. The tech division was showing off some kind of app one didn't understand. The HR booth had a bowl of fun-sized candy bars that I definitely took 3 of when I thought no one was looking, because if I was going to have a mental breakdown, I might as well have chocolate. And then I saw her, Maya Cho, Rachel's executive assistant. I'd met her exactly twice, once at a company holiday party where I'd had too much wine and tried to explain cryptocurrency to anyone who would listen, and once when I'd picked Rachel up from work and Maya had been leaving at the same time. She was in her late 20s, terrifyingly organized based on the one glimpse I'd gotten of her desk, and had the kind of efficient energy that suggested she could plan a corporate takeover before lunch and still have time to answer emails. She was manning, or womaning, I guess, a booth for the executive office, and she had that professional smile that people in corporate jobs develop over time, the one that says, "I'm friendly but also could destroy you with bureaucracy if necessary." This was it. This was my chance. I could casually strike up a conversation, mention Rachel in a totally normal way, and then subtly guide the discussion toward whether her boss was conducting some kind of elaborate romantic fraud. I approached the booth with what I hoped looked like genuine interest in career opportunities and not barely contained panic. "Hi, I'm interested in learning more about executive office opportunities," I said, which was technically true if you counted opportunities to figure out if my wife is married to someone else as a category of employment. Maya's professional smile widened. "Of course, we're always looking for talented people. Are you interested in administrative roles or more strategic positions?" She was good at this, making everyone feel like their interest was valid and important, even when they were clearly an interloper with suspicious intentions. "Strategic, I think," I said, because I'd already committed to this bit and couldn't back out now. "I've heard amazing things about the leadership team here, especially Rachel Davis and Evan Johnson. They seem like incredible leaders to work with." I said it casually, like I was just name-dropping executives I'd read about online and not fishing for information about whether one of them was secretly married to me and the other one was secretly married to the first one, creating some kind of confusing marriage triangle that defied both logic and possibly several laws. Maya's face lit up the way people's faces do when you mention something they're genuinely enthusiastic about. Oh my God, yes. Rachel and Evan are incredible. They're like the dream team of executives. They finish each other's sentences. They have this totally intuitive working relationship. They're basically work soulmates. Work soulmates. She said work soulmates. My actual soul, if I still had one after the past few days, left my body and probably went to go live somewhere else, anywhere else. Maybe in Victor's taxi where at least there were muffins and sad music and some semblance of understanding about human suffering. That's great. I managed to say, my voice sounding like it was coming from very far away, possibly from the dimension where my rational brain had escaped to. So they're close. Inseparable, Maya said, and I swear she had no idea she was currently destroying me with every word. They're always together, meetings, lunch, business trips. Rachel says Evan is the best partner she's ever had in business. Partner. Best partner. The words echoed in my head like someone was playing them on repeat through a stadium speaker system. I was supposed to be her partner. I was her actual legal partner. We had signed papers. We had a marriage license somewhere in our filing cabinet between the car insurance documents and the warranty for the dishwasher that had broken 6 months ago. I must have looked strange, probably pale, definitely sweaty, absolutely on the verge of some kind of episode, because Maya's professional smile shifted into something more concerned. Are you okay? You look like you might need to sit down. I'm fine. I lied, which was becoming my default response to everything lately. Just, it's warm in here. And that's when I heard it. That voice. The one I'd know anywhere. The one that usually meant comfort and home and safety, but now meant, oh God, oh God, oh God, I'm about to be caught. Liam. I turned, and there was Rachel, standing about 10 feet away with an expression that cycled through confusion, surprise, and what I'm pretty sure was the dawning realization that her husband had completely lost his mind. She was wearing her Navy power suit, the one she saved for important meetings, and she looked every inch the CEO, poised, professional, and absolutely not prepared to deal with whatever this situation was about to become. Maya looked between us, her professional smile faltering as she clearly tried to process why this random career fair attendee knew the CEO's first name. Oh, do you two know each other? He's my husband, Rachel said, and I watched Maya's face go through about 17 different expressions in 2 seconds flat as she reassembled her entire understanding of the past 5 minutes. Rachel led me out of the conference room and down the hallway with the kind of purposeful determination that suggested she'd already planned this intervention and was just waiting for the right moment to execute it. I followed behind her like a man walking toward his own execution, except instead of a firing squad, I was apparently about to meet the man I'd spent the last 72 hours convinced was my wife's secret husband. My palms were sweating. My heart was doing that thing where it felt like it was trying to escape through my ribcage. The corporate hallway seemed to stretch on forever, each step echoing off the polished floors like a countdown to my humiliation. We stopped outside an office with a nameplate that read Evan Johnson, Chief Operating Officer, in that elegant font that probably cost more than my entire education. Rachel knocked twice and opened the door without waiting for a response, because apparently when you're the CEO, waiting for permission is optional. Evan was sitting at his desk, which was somehow both immaculately organized and aesthetically pleasing in a way that made me irrationally annoyed. Everything had a place. His laptop at a perfect angle, a small succulent in a geometric planter, a framed photo that I could now see featured him and another man with 2 poodles, and a coffee mug that said Synergy Happens, which I desperately wanted to hate, but couldn't because it was objectively funny. He looked up when we entered, and his face went through a rapid sequence of expressions, professional greeting, recognition, and then something that looked like delighted realization. Oh my God, he said, standing up with a smile that was somehow both amused and genuinely warm. You must be Liam. Rachel texted me. Definitely _Liam Davis himself. In the flesh. He came around his desk and extended his hand. Evan Johnson, alleged secret husband and apparent homewrecker. Nice to finally meet you properly. I shook his hand, feeling my face burn with embarrassment so intense it probably could have powered a small city. I am so sorry, I managed to say. I thought that I'd stolen your wife? Evan finished, still smiling. Yeah, Rachel filled me in on the highlights. The restaurant stakeout? The taxi driver philosopher? The career fair infiltration? Honestly, it's like something out of a rom-com. Except instead of the meet cute, it's the meet awkward misunderstanding. I filmed you through a restaurant window, I said, because apparently I needed to catalog all my crimes out loud to truly appreciate their magnitude. I watched you and Rachel eating pasta, and I convinced myself it meant something sinister instead of just two co-workers having dinner. The pasta incident. Evan laughed, a genuine full-body laugh that made me understand why people probably enjoyed working with him. Okay, so context. My boyfriend Marcus has me on this insane diet where I can't eat carbs after 6 p.m., and Rachel thinks it's the funniest thing in the world. She's been torturing me for weeks by eating bread and pasta in front of me. The feeding me pasta thing was her being deliberately evil because she knows I'm weak and Marcus checks my fitness app. He shook his head. If you'd stuck around for another 30 seconds, you would have seen me take one bite and then immediately text Marcus a confession and a promise to do extra cardio. Rachel perched on the edge of Evan's desk, looking way too amused by this entire situation. Should we tell him about the time you cried during the Pixar presentation? Absolutely not, Evan said. A man cries during one emotionally manipulative scene about a robot learning to love, and suddenly, it becomes his defining characteristic. He turned back to me. But seriously, even if I were straight, which let me be incredibly clear, I am so far from straight that I'm basically a circle, Rachel would still pick you. She literally never shuts up about you. Liam said the funniest thing. Liam made me breakfast. Liam found this ridiculous YouTube video I have to show everyone. You're like her favorite topic of conversation besides quarterly earnings reports. Really? I asked Rachel, who had the decency to look slightly embarrassed. You're very quotable, she said defensively. And you do find good YouTube videos. Before I could respond, there was a knock on the door, and a man walked in who could only be Marcus. He was tall, impeccably dressed in the kind of casual but clearly expensive outfit that suggested he understood fashion in a way I never would, with perfectly styled hair and the kind of presence that made you immediately pay attention. He was carrying 2 coffee cups and stopped dead when he saw me, a slow smile spreading across his face. No way, he said, looking between me and Evan. Is this him? Is this the spy husband? He turned to Evan. Babe, you didn't tell me we were having the confrontation today. I would have brought popcorn. Marcus, this is Liam, Evan said, gesturing to me like I was an exhibit in a museum. Liam, this is Marcus Vega, my boyfriend of 6 years, co-parent to our poodles, and the reason I can't eat carbs after 6. Marcus set down the coffee cups and immediately came over to shake my hand with enthusiasm that seemed disproportionate to the situation. Dude, I have been dying to meet you. Evan told me everything. The restaurant surveillance? The LinkedIn deep dive? Creating a burner account to look at beach photos from 6 months ago? That's commitment. That's love. That's honestly kind of iconic. It's embarrassing, I corrected him. It's both, Marcus said cheerfully. It can be 2 things. But seriously, the fact that you went full detective mode because you thought someone was moving in on your wife? That's actually kind of sweet in a restraining order adjacent way. He grabbed one of the coffee cups and handed it to Evan. Also, for the record, Evan talks about Rachel constantly too, but it's always work stuff. Rachel had this brilliant strategy. Rachel restructured the team dynamics. It's very boring and professional. You, however, get the good stories. Like the time you accidentally adopted a cat because you thought it was lost, but it actually belonged to your neighbor, and you'd been feeding it for 3 weeks before anyone told you. Mr. Whiskers, Rachel said, laughing. I forgot about that. You were so offended when Janet from next door came to claim him. I'd bonded with that cat, I said defensively. We had a routine. You'd bought him a bed and a custom name tag, Rachel added. Janet had to very gently explain that his actual name was Buttons, and he was just playing you for extra meals. Marcus was grinning. See, these are the stories we hear. Not Liam is having an identity crisis and stalking his wife. But Liam accidentally stole a cat through pure cluelessness. You're a legend in this office, and you didn't even know it. The four of us ended up sitting in Evan's office for the next hour, and somehow, impossibly, it stopped feeling like a humiliating intervention and started feeling like hanging out. Marcus was hilarious and sharp and made fun of Evan's corporate jargon with the kind of affectionate mockery that only comes from years of partnership. Evan told stories about board meetings and Rachel's habit of making pop culture references that nobody else understood. Rachel revealed that she'd actually been trying to set up a dinner for all of us to meet for months, but could never find a time that worked with everyone's schedules. Although this is definitely a more memorable first meeting, Marcus said, most people just do dinner and small talk. You went for the full stalker experience. Really committed to making an impression. I'm never going to live this down, am I? I asked. Absolutely not. All three of them said in unison. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed me pictures of Dolce and Gabbana, the poodles, who were indeed wearing designer outfits in most of the photos. This is from last week's photo shoot, he said, showing me a professional quality picture of two poodles in matching sweaters. We did a fall theme. The photographer took 3 hours to get the lighting right. You hired a photographer for your dogs? I asked. We hire a photographer quarterly, Evan corrected. They have their own Instagram account. 12,000 followers. It's very serious. Rachel was scrolling through her phone and suddenly held it up to show everyone. Oh my God, I forgot I took this. It was a screenshot from my burner account, definitely _not_Liam_Davis, showing that I'd looked at one of Evan's posts from 3 years ago. This is from a company retreat in Colorado. You scrolled back 3 years to look at Evan snowboarding. I was being thorough, I said weakly. You were being unhinged, Marcus countered, but he was smiling. But like, in an endearing way. Evan, we should frame this. The time someone cared enough to Instagram stalk you. I get Instagram stalked regularly, Evan protested. Occupational hazard of being devastatingly attractive and professionally successful. And humble, Marcus added. Don't forget humble. By the time we left Evan's office, I felt like I'd been through some kind of bizarre bonding experience that I hadn't known I needed. Marcus had somehow gotten my number and added me to a group chat with him, Evan, and Rachel called the Johnson-Davis Alliance. I tried to protest the name, but was outvoted 3-1. Evan had shown me his calendar and pointed out all the events that Rachel had declined on both their behalves because she was protecting our work-life balance, which apparently included monthly team dinners and quarterly company parties. You should come to the next one, Evan said as we walked back toward the elevators. Bring your spy equipment. Maybe a disguise. Really lean into the theme. He's never going to let me forget this, I said to Rachel. None of us are, Marcus called from behind us. This is premium embarrassment content. We're going to tell this story at parties for years. Our future children will hear about the time Uncle Liam thought Uncle Evan was stealing Aunt Rachel. We don't have children, Evan pointed out. Future hypothetical children, Marcus clarified. The poodles count as children for now, and they deserve to know this story. As we rode the elevator back down to the lobby, Rachel leaned against me and said quietly, So, on a scale of 1 to 10, how embarrassed are you? 11, I admitted. Maybe 12. Good, she said, but she was smiling. Maybe next time you'll just ask me questions instead of creating elaborate spy scenarios. There's going to be a next time? I asked, horrified. With you? Probably. She kissed my cheek. But that's okay. Life would be boring if you were normal. Victor was waiting outside in his taxi. Rachel had apparently texted him my location because she was concerned about my state of mind, and when I got in, he took one look at my face and said, Is better now? So much better, I said. And so much worse. Both at the same time. He nodded sagely. This is life. Always both. 3 weeks passed, and I'd almost reached the point where I could think about my career fair infiltration without wanting to disappear into the floor out of sheer embarrassment. Marcus had made good on his promise to never let me forget it, sending approximately 47 memes to the group chat that somehow all related to my detective work, my surveillance skills, or my general inability to just ask my wife a simple question like a normal human being. Evan had started calling me Agent Davis in every single message, and Rachel thought the whole thing was so funny that she'd told the story at what I'm pretty sure was every single work function she'd attended since. Life had returned to something resembling normal. I went back to my freelance consulting work, which was boring but paid the bills. Rachel continued being a CEO, and doing whatever mysterious CEO things involved long meetings and strategic planning. Mr. Whiskers continued his reign of terror over our household, knocking things off counters and judging us silently. The group chat had become a regular part of my day, which was weird because 3 weeks ago, I'd been convinced Evan was my mortal enemy. And now he was sending me pictures of Dolce and Gabbana wearing Halloween costumes and asking my opinion on whether Sherlock Bones was too on the nose for a poodle detective outfit. It was a random Thursday morning when Rachel came into the kitchen holding an envelope with the kind of expression that meant something was about to happen. I'd learned to read her faces over 5 years of marriage. This was her, "I have news, and I'm not sure how you're going to react" face, which could mean anything from, "I bought an expensive piece of furniture without consulting you," to "My mother is coming to visit for a week." "What did you do?" I asked, looking up from my cereal, which I'd been eating while scrolling through my phone and reading an article about cryptocurrency that I still didn't understand despite reading it 3 times. "Why do you assume I did something?" she asked, but she was smiling that smile that meant I was absolutely right to be suspicious. "Because you have your 'I have news' face on. And that face has a 70-30 split between good news and terrifying news, and I can never tell which one it's going to be until you start talking." She sat down across from me and slid the envelope over. It was fancy, heavy cardstock, my name written in actual calligraphy like someone had commissioned a professional to make me feel important. "Open it," she said. I opened it carefully, because the envelope was too nice to just rip into like I usually did with mail, and pulled out what appeared to be an invitation. Heavy cardstock, embossed lettering, the works. I read it once, then twice, because the first time I was sure I'd misread something fundamental. "You're invited to the grand opening of the Davis Wing, Mercy Hospital, a new pediatric care facility made possible through the generous support of the Johnson Family Foundation and BrightPath Media." I looked up at Rachel, then back at the invitation, then back at Rachel. "The Davis Wing?" "As in, our last name Davis." "As in our last name Davis," she confirmed, still smiling. "Remember that consulting bonus you got 2 years ago from the Henderson Project? The big one that you said we should do something meaningful with instead of just putting it all in savings." I did remember. It had been the biggest payday of my freelance career. $30,000 for 3 months of work that had nearly killed me, but had apparently impressed the client enough to recommend me to half their network. Rachel and I had talked about what to do with it over multiple dinners, throwing around ideas ranging from practical, retirement fund, house down payment, to absurd, buying a boat neither of us knew how to operate, adopting 17 dogs, taking a trip to Japan, and only eating at places featured in anime. "You said you wanted to do something that mattered," Rachel continued. "Something that would help people. So I talked to Evan about the Johnson Family Foundation. It's his family's charity. They fund medical facilities and research, and we match your contribution with company funds. It took 2 years of planning and construction, but it's finally done. A whole pediatric wing, 20 beds, state-of-the-art equipment, family rooms so parents can stay with their kids. And they named it after us." I stared at the invitation, feeling something massive and overwhelming building in my chest. "We funded a hospital wing." "Technically, you funded part of a hospital wing. The foundation and BrightPath covered the majority, but your contribution was the catalyst that got it started." Evan's family has a personal connection to pediatric care. His sister Victoria's son Theo had cancer when he was 6. He's fine now, in remission for 3 years, but the experience made the family want to do something to help other families going through the same thing. She reached across the table and took my hand. "The grand opening is Saturday. There's going to be a ceremony, some speeches, a tour of the facility. And they want you there. Both of us, obviously, but specifically you, because apparently you're a major donor now." "I'm a major donor," I repeated, testing out the words. They felt foreign, like a suit that didn't quite fit. I wasn't a major donor. I was a guy who ate cereal for breakfast and had once spent an entire weekend convinced his wife was committing bigamy. Major donors were other people, rich people, important people, people who definitely didn't create burner Instagram accounts to stalk their wife's coworkers. "You're a major donor," Rachel confirmed. "And before you spiral into some self-deprecating speech about how you don't deserve recognition, let me stop you. You do. You earned that money working your ass off, and you chose to use it to help kids. That matters. You matter. And I'm really, really proud of you." Saturday arrived faster than I wanted it to, mostly because I'd spent the intervening days in a low-grade state of panic about having to attend a fancy hospital opening where I'd presumably have to talk to important people and pretend I was the kind of person who regularly contributed to charitable causes instead of someone who'd spent the last month creating elaborate spy scenarios in his own head. I'd bought a new suit for the occasion, Rachel insisted, saying my wedding suit had been through enough trauma and deserved retirement. And I'd practiced looking humble and gracious in the mirror, which mostly just made me look constipated and weird. The hospital was in the newer part of the city, all glass and steel and modern architecture that looked nothing like the hospitals I remembered from my childhood, which had been beige and depressing and smelled like industrial cleaner and despair. We arrived 15 minutes early because Rachel was pathologically punctual and immediately ran into Evan and Marcus in the lobby, both of them dressed in sharp suits that made my new suit feel like it had been purchased at a discount warehouse, which it definitely had been. Agent Davis, Evan called out, because apparently that nickname was never going away. Ready for your big debut as a philanthropist? I'm ready to stand in the back and let other people take credit, I said honestly. Absolutely not happening, Marcus said, linking his arm through mine like we were old friends instead of people who'd met 3 weeks ago under the worst possible circumstances. You're getting full credit. We've already seen the program. Your name is in there. There's probably going to be a plaque. You might have to give a speech. Nobody said anything about a speech, I said, looking at Rachel with what I'm sure was barely concealed panic. Nobody's making you give a speech, she assured me. Probably, unless they ask, in which case, you should definitely do it. You're all terrible, I informed the group. Every single one of you. But you love us anyway, Marcus said cheerfully. That's your fatal flaw. You're too nice to tell us to leave you alone. We made our way to the new pediatric wing, following signs that led us through hallways that smelled like fresh paint and new carpet instead of the usual hospital smell. The Davis wing was on the 3rd floor, and when we walked through the doors, I actually stopped in my tracks. It was beautiful, not in the sterile, intimidating way hospitals usually were, but in a way that felt warm and welcoming and designed with actual human beings in mind. The walls were painted in soft, calming colors, blues and greens and gentle yellows. There were murals of trees and animals and stars, clearly painted by someone with actual artistic talent. The nurse's station was designed to look less clinical and more like a comfortable desk you'd see in a nice office. Large windows let in natural light. There were family rooms with couches and chairs that actually looked comfortable, not like the torture devices hospitals usually provided. Holy shit, I whispered, and Rachel squeezed my hand. You did this, she said quietly. Well, we did this. But you're the one who said we should do something meaningful. People started arriving. Hospital administrators in suits, doctors in white coats, nurses in scrubs, families who'd be using the facility, reporters with cameras and notebooks. There was a podium set up near the entrance with a ribbon stretched across the doorway, and I realized with growing horror that this was actually happening, that there was going to be an actual ceremony with actual speeches, and I was somehow part of this. Evan's sister Victoria arrived with her son Theo, a 10-year-old kid with enormous energy and the kind of smile that suggested he found everything in the world fascinating and slightly hilarious. He was wearing a suit that matched his mom's professional attire, but he'd paired it with sneakers that had lights in them, which I immediately respected. You must be Liam, Victoria said, shaking my hand with a grip that suggested she didn't mess around. Evans told me all about you. The surveillance, the career fair, the burner account, all of it. I think it's incredibly romantic in a deeply concerning way. That seems to be the general consensus, I admitted. Theo was staring up at me with the kind of unfiltered curiosity that only kids could pull off. Are you really the guy who thought Uncle Evan was married to Mrs. Davis? Theo, Victoria said in that warning tone that all parents seem to develop. I really am, I told him, because lying to kids seemed wrong. I made a big mistake and didn't ask the right questions. It was pretty dumb. Uncle Evan says you followed them to a restaurant and filmed them through the window. Theo continued, completely undeterred by his mother's warning look. That's like spy stuff. That's cool. It's really not cool, I said. It's actually kind of creepy and something you should never do. But it makes a funny story, Theo countered with irrefutable kid logic. The ceremony started a few minutes later, and I found myself standing near the podium with Rachel, Evan, Marcus, Victoria, and several hospital administrators whose names I immediately forgot because my brain was too busy panicking about the possibility of having to speak in public. The hospital CEO gave a speech about community and healing and the importance of pediatric care. Victoria spoke about her experience with Theo's illness and her family's commitment to helping other families. Evan gave remarks that managed to be both professional and genuinely moving, talking about how businesses had a responsibility to invest in their communities. And then Rachel was at the podium, and I realized too late that she was talking about me. 2 months after the hospital wing opened, I'd somehow become a regular volunteer there, which wasn't part of any plan, but had happened organically after Theo had asked if I wanted to help with the new gaming room they were setting up for patients. Turns out, spending time with kids who were dealing with serious medical issues put my ridiculous marriage paranoia into perspective real quick. The kids called me Mr. Pajama Guy because I'd made the catastrophic mistake of showing up one Saturday in my most comfortable pants, which happened to be covered in tiny cartoon tacos, and Theo had announced to the entire ward that I dressed like someone's fun uncle. The nickname stuck, and now parents would actually request the Pajama Guy when their kids needed distraction during difficult procedures. Evan and Marcus became regular visitors too, usually bringing pizza and the latest gossip from BrightPath, which the older kids found weirdly entertaining. Maya started volunteering on weekends, mostly to mock my terrible origami folding skills and remind everyone about the career fair incident, which had apparently become legendary office lore. Even Derek, the security guard, showed up one day, looking sheepish and uncomfortable in civilian clothes. His daughter Emma was a patient, and he'd finally connected the dots that the crazy husband with eclairs was now the pajama guy his daughter wouldn't stop talking about. Sorry about the whole. He gestured vaguely. Mistaken identity thing. Sorry about the whole stalking situation, I replied. We called it even. The Davis wing became this weird intersection of my old chaos and new purpose. Every volunteer shift reminded me that getting mistaken for a stranger's husband had somehow led me here. To sick kids who needed distraction, to families who needed support, to a community I didn't know I was missing. Sometimes the universe's weirdest detours ended up exactly where you needed to be. 6 months after what Rachel now called the great husband confusion of 2025, life had settled into something better than normal. It was normal with purpose, normal with perspective, normal with a group chat that never stopped roasting me and a hospital wing with my name on it. Rachel and I finally had the kind of peace that comes from surviving something ridiculous together and coming out stronger on the other side. We'd also started couples therapy, mostly because our therapist, Dr. Morrison, heard the story and said, "Oh, you two definitely need professional help processing this," which was fair. Turns out, jumping to catastrophic conclusions instead of having conversations was a pattern worth exploring, according to someone with multiple degrees and a lot of patience for my nonsense. Evan and Marcus became actual friends, the kind who showed up for dinner unannounced and raided our fridge, who knew our Netflix password and judged our viewing choices, who'd integrated so completely into our lives that I couldn't remember what it was like before I thought Evan was my romantic rival. Marcus had convinced me to join his gym, where I lasted exactly 2 sessions before realizing I was perfectly happy with my current fitness level of can walk upstairs without dying. Theo kept building increasingly elaborate Lego versions of me in various pajamas, which his mom framed and gave me for my birthday. I hung them in my home office, because they reminded me that sometimes your biggest embarrassments become your favorite stories. The volunteer work at the Davis wing became the highlight of my week. The kids, the families, the feeling of actually mattering in someone's day. Rachel would sometimes stop by after work, and I'd catch her watching me read to a kid or help set up the gaming systems, and she'd have this expression that made every stupid decision I'd made worth it. Sometimes, late at night when we were on the couch and she was doing work emails while I scrolled through the group chat's latest meme about my surveillance skills, Rachel would look over and say, "Remember when you thought I was married to Evan Johnson?" And I'd reply, "Remember when you fed him pasta and broke my brain?" And we'd laugh, because it was funny now, because we'd survived it, because sometimes love means getting everything spectacularly wrong and finding your way back to right. I still wore my taco pajamas proudly. They reminded me that even the dumbest misunderstandings could lead somewhere beautiful. If you were lucky enough to have people who loved you through the chaos, laughed at your mistakes, and stuck around for the story you'd tell together afterward.